Hello, and welcome to the next class in the Jedi Path Academy Learners program. Today we are doing Shapes of Jedi Compassion, where we will be talking about compassion, the forms it takes, and our relationship to compassion as Jedi. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. And here we are, the Shapes of Jedi Compassion, a Jedi Path Academy Learners program by L. Christopher Bird. And that's me. Okay. And who am I? I'm L. Christopher Bird. I'm going to be your instructor today. I began walking the Jedi Path in 2005 by asking why not. I was inspired by the Jedi census phenomenon, where people, I think as a joke, were putting down Jedi as their religion on census in the Commonwealth countries. And I thought, well, why couldn't this be a workable path? And I always had dreams of being a Jedi since childhood, and I really started thinking, well, this could be a real thing. And soon I found the Jedi community. And in 2012, I created the website JediPath.org when I thought I had a good enough handle on things where I could start sharing with other people. They were early steps of mine. In 2017, I was knighted in the California Jedi organization at the Gathering, where I went through a peer review process and to see if I qualified, if I met the requirements for California Jedi Knight. The requirements are available to see online at californiajedi.org. And I trained towards that, and I continued my training after that. I still train to this day. I think I've had some growth, and I've had a lot more responsibility in the last 3 years since I've been knighted. But it's not about the title, it's about the work. And I can do away with the title, but I'm here for the work, not the accolades. And so, without further ado, let's actually get into the material today. So the first thing that we need to do is define our terms. And so what we're asking is, what is compassion? Some see compassion as an emotion. It's something we feel. And there is definitely some truth to that, but it's only a facet of what compassion is when you look at it as an emotion. So the Jedi are mindful of emotions and do not allow them to rule us, even when the emotion is compassion. So emotional motivation is not where it's at for Jedi. It's, or at least not the primary concern that we can use when we're doing the work. Any strong emotion can tend to distort things. And as Jedi, we need to cultivate peace when we're emotional and not let it rule us, but it can still guide us at some point. Instead, we cultivate compassion as an attitude. It is something we do, something we cultivate, something that we actively try to engender in our internal landscape. Is we try to cultivate this compassionate attitude. And compassion as an attitude is expressed through compassionate action. Because if we're just feeling compassionate and we're not out there in the world putting that into action, that doesn't do good for anyone. So we're Jedi. We want to create world betterment through self-betterment. But if we never get to that world betterment place by putting compassion in action, then we're not walking the Jedi path as it should be walked. At least that's my opinion. So I'm going to open up the floor to the Jedi Path learners and ask for any input, thoughts, questions on what I've just laid out about what compassion is and how it relates to us as Jedi. Everyone's muted, so. And if you have them, okay, go ahead, Lucy.
I was just going to say, I mean, you got to it at the end there, that I see compassion as more of the actionable thing, and empathy would be more of the emotional, seeing something from another's point of view. The ability to be compassionate would start with empathy. And that's where the emotion would be.
Right.
And compassion being the actionable part.
Yeah, that's good. So empathy is closely tied. And but we don't want to rely on just our innate sense of empathy. That too is something that can be cultivated. You know, the whole, you know, like Atticus Finch said in To Kill a Mockingbird, how you won't understand a person until you get inside their skin and walk around a while. And empathy in that form can be mindful and conscious, where we're specifically putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. And so that too should be cultivated, and it was good to point that out, Lucy. Thank you. Anything else before we go on to the next slide?
Nope, I don't see anybody else unmuting either, so.
Okay, great. So the next slide. What is the purpose of compassion? What are we actually seeking to achieve through our compassionate attitude and actions? So first we must understand that attitudes of what we call the dark side include fear, anger, hate, greed, and selfishness. And all these types of attitudes lead to suffering. These things cause suffering. Attitudes of the Force, or the light, as some people like to call it, include non-attachment, calmness, selflessness, and compassion, among other things, all of which leads to the cessation of suffering. These are active things that a Jedi or a person can do that, when they're put into practice, will reduce the amount of suffering in ourselves and hopefully in others. And it is this desire to lessen suffering in others that is the root of Jedi compassion. This is our motivation and our purpose for doing compassionate action, is that we want there to be less suffering. At least that's my view of things. A lot of people will recognize how this aligns with Buddhist thought. as an influence, but I hope that we're not just copying Buddhism here, but we're putting a Jedi stamp on how we practice compassion in a unique Jedi way, or a way that a Jedi would. You don't have to be a Jedi to do this, but if you are a Jedi, it's one of my expectations. So, thoughts on the purpose of compassion? Well, I'll take from your silence that no one disagrees, because disagreement would be fine because we're having a conversation. But I've laid it out, and so we'll go on to the next slide if there's nothing else. So now into the meat of the presentation. Let's talk about the shapes of compassion. The first shape of compassion is service. Something that we do as Jedi is we serve others. The word knight, as in Jedi Knight, if you dig into its etymology, infers a servant. It's a word that means servant. And so Jedi exercise compassion through our service. So here I want to open up to the participants in the class and give them an opportunity for them to talk about what their Jedi service looks like, what they have done, what they want to do, and different ways that they have seen compassion as an act of service. So anyone go ahead and jump in.
So I'll jump in, and I see service as a very wide range of activities that can be done to compassionate ends. It can be everything from volunteering to help others, to listening and lending an ear when someone's struggling. So it can, I think that compassion can be expressed widely, and as such, there are many acts of service that can also be expressed.
Yeah, this is one of the biggest, widest shapes of compassion is service, and usually the one we see the most, I think, because most anyone can do this, and most people, I think, are willing to do this. Sure, you'll get the self-centered and the selfish people, but I think most people at their heart, at least within their own groups, if they can't be big enough to hold in their community or the world, will serve those within their sphere of influence. And yeah, there's a lot of ways to serve. I'm glad you mentioned listening, Anna. Listening is really a great way to show compassion, is to listen well, and for someone just to be heard, and that definitely can lessen suffering, I think, as is feeding people or clothing people or any act of service. Yeah. So anyone else on the shape of compassion that is service? Okay, we'll go to the next one. The next shape of compassion is justice. This is something near and dear to my heart, that justice being a compassionate action, and that it's compassion that causes Jedi to strive for justice. And justice is another thing that has many forms within it. We have, of course, all our social justice pushes. We have racial justice, justice for any of those that are oppressed because of their sexual identity, their sexual orientation, or their sexual or their gender. So we want to see justice done for these people that are oppressed. We want to see restorative justice when something's been wronged. But it says, so when Obi-Wan Kenobi is telling Luke what a Jedi was in Episode 4, New Hope, he said, Jedi were the defenders of peace and justice. And peace and justice are closely linked, because without justice, you cannot have peace. And too many people are adverse to confrontation, to conflict, which we have to engage in for justice to be done, and they want to go straight to peace. But you can't have peace while there is injustice. And so so I'm rambling about justice, but let's hear what you all think about justice and how justice relates to compassion.
I don't know what exactly we can add to that. When I think of service, I kind of mentally tried to go back to the last slide where you're talking about non-attachment and the things that a Jedi is, and how we are compassionate and we can listen and comfort, and like maybe try to get people to back down from the anger and the hate and the things that lead to suffering, alleviate that suffering. But then if we don't take that next step, if we're just like always just being okay, calm down, let's just have everything peaceful, like you were saying, without justice, sometimes we have to fix something.
Right. Exactly right. Yes. That's a great insight, Lucy. I'm so glad you said that.
We're close to Jedi when we're compassionate, but if we don't take some action when we see something that can be fixed, or make the attempt, we're not getting to that next step. Yeah. So that's my 2 cents.
That's a fantastic contribution. I'm so pleased you said that. I really am, because I'm a little jealous as a writer that I didn't phrase it that way. Sometimes things need to be fixed, and we can't just sweep something broken under the rug and call it fixed. Things have to be repaired. And the mechanism for that repair in our society is justice. Brilliant insight. Thank you so much.
I wish I was trying pushing. Somebody else talk now.
I just wanted to add, I think that's brilliant. And yeah, absolutely. 100%.
you know, and justice delayed is no excuse not to seek it. I think needs to be said here. You know, just the acceptance of, well, this is the way things are, and oh, that happened so long ago. Why can't we just forget it when the harm, when the injury has not been repaired? It still needs to be addressed.
I think also there's confusion sometimes between society's laws and justice. So, for example, something can be legal but also unjust, like fundamentally. And so, in that case, like there's like restoration that needs to be done or repair in terms of whatever happened. But then also, society's laws may need some revision too. And I think there's a lot of conflation between what's legal and what is just, and they're not necessarily the same thing.
Correct. Just looking in our own country, in the United States of America, there are many ways where it's legal to discriminate against people, and we're chipping away at those cutouts where I mean, us as a nation, we give lip service to saying discrimination is wrong, but we still want to carve out these exceptions. Especially, you know, we still want it to be legal to discriminate against queer people or transgender people, which is happening in the United States right now. This, as we record this in October of 2020. And yeah, and in places around the world where it's the law of the land, where you can persecute and prosecute someone for being gay, does not make it just. So yeah, so justice is a concept. Society's laws are meant to bring about justice, but sometimes they're flawed and need to be changed. Again, something is broken and needs to be fixed. And if there is a law that is allowing oppression or other unjust behavior, then we need to work through activism and through democracy to have that change. If we're going to do anything but give lip service to justice. So any other thoughts on justice before we move on to the last shape of compassion? Okay, here's the one. Wrath. So this is one that doesn't really occur to many people when you think about compassion, because we want to include compassion with niceness, positive traits. We value nonviolence over violence. But the only reason that nonviolence will work is that if those perpetrating violence against the nonviolent feel shame, then it can change their heart. But if they're fine with laying down violence on people or causing harm, nonviolence will not get you justice. Nonviolence will not get you change if they're fine with hurting you and they're not held accountable. And so I often ask this question. Anna and Lucy know what's coming, what the question is. But for those who are viewing this at a later time, I'd like everyone to chime in on this, to give it some thought. But I posit the question: when is a violent action also a compassionate action? Is that possible? Can you think of an example, even a hypothetical one? I'm going to open it up to the floor.
Anybody else can butt in on me, but I had a lot of trouble with this, I think, at first, because I am the peace and love and everybody get along, please person. And when I feel like their violence might be necessary, I'm also thinking about the person on the, across my opponent. And, the fact that, by being violent, that I'm like maybe getting away from my mandate of peace and love. But I have to be thinking about the person that I'm doing it for. That the action is born out of compassion for something else, not necessarily being in the fight.
Right. So, compassion.
It takes a long time for me to get there. It's like it takes a lot of steps for me to get to that point that I really had to think this through to get here. But that possibility is out there that I may have to fight. Anyway.
Yeah, and it's to lessen harm. This is the real world, and we can't always be ideologically pure. Sometimes we have to get our hands dirty, and hurting someone is a terrible thing. It's awful, but sometimes it's also necessary in order to prevent them from doing further harm. So how we put this in our equation where wrath is applicable, we have to ask ourselves, is doing nothing to intervene or intervening in a less impactful way going to increase or decrease harm and suffering? That's the metric. We may have, a real life villain, though everyone's the hero of their own story, but someone doing real harm. And if they are not stopped from doing that harm, so much more harm and suffering will be a result of us acquiescing or saying we can't do it, or someone else has to do it. So, but at the same time, we have to check ourselves. We have to make sure that we're right. Again, that we're not acting out of emotional distortion, that we're not acting out of a sense of vengeance, that we're not acting out of a sense of winning even, but rather our hearts, our value protection, that we are doing this to protect a greater number, who can't protect themselves perhaps, or need help protecting, or we don't want to be on the sidelines. And wrath isn't necessarily always violent action. Wrath takes many other forms, but it is combative, and it's about, we fight so that other people don't have to. We fight so that there can be resolution, so fighting won't be necessary afterwards. So, and I'm rambling again. Anna, did you have anything that you wanted to say about wrath?
So, sure. So, mostly I agree. Actually, all of it I agree. And I also think that we should ask ourselves, like, am I the correct person to engage in this wrath? Right? Because sometimes, like, something will happen and something or someone does need to be stopped, but I might not be the correct person to perform the stoppage. I can facilitate, and I can call for help, but it's not always on us to do this. And while there could be a possibility, I would say that for many of us in modern society, sometimes it's more about being able to make a smart decision in the moment that's not clouded by emotion. And sometimes that decision can be calling for help.
Right. Yeah, very good. Right. So as long as those who are calling for help, we can trust to help justly and that they will serve.
Exactly.
You know, again, this is 2020, and it would be negligent to not address a form of calling for help that is not compassionate, that doesn't serve justice, but is wrathful, but not compassionate wrath. And this is the phenomenon, basically calling the cops on Black people living their lives. Right. So when we call for help, we got to make sure that what we're calling for help will serve the means of compassion, that it will reduce harm, that it won't cause harm. So I don't think anyone here, or hopefully no one watching my video, would say call the cops on the guy for bird watching in the park because they feel threatened for him just existing. But yeah, you're right, call for help, but we gotta be mindful of what form that help will take. So are there any more thoughts on the shapes of compassion? Any shape, service, justice, wrath? This is actually the last slide. And any final thoughts on the shapes of compassion?
Well, I just think that if violence happens, which it often does, and we want to help, we first have to look at the situation closer before we do anything stupid, because sometimes what we may think would help isn't necessarily what really does, or what the person or the people want. So either we just clearly think it through or wait until the moment is there, or we don't interrupt at all, I think.
Yeah, that's very good, Grace. Yeah, we need our focus needs to be clear. Our vision needs to have a certain clarity to it if we're going to engage in this work. If you're just out to score points and to beat someone up, even, wrath, this is the punching Nazis part of the Jedi path, compassionate wrath. And if you're going to do that work, you have to have a clarity of vision to do it. So Grace, you're correct in that we have to have an idea of what the situation is and what our participation in whatever situation will likely result in. That being said, we can't always wait for the planets to align and for the perfect moment to come. Sometimes we have to act with imperfect information and in imperfect situations. But we still have to act, because doing nothing would increase suffering, would allow for injustice. and stuff. So Grace, you are correct. So we get as much information as we can, but sometimes, and this is just because we're in the real world, and the real world is not ideal. And often we have to act in less than ideal situations. In fact, ideal situation rarely happens. There's always something that's imperfect, and we just got to do the best we can. Keep our motivations good. Be a Jedi. To quote Opie McLeod's Jedi method, we need to have that Jedi intent, Jedi action. That gives us the Jedi outcome. So in this work, we want to incorporate the Jedi method, that we are acting as Jedi in this regard when we're acting compassionately, especially in justice and wrath, because they can get so tricky. So is there anything else? Okay. So, okay. Go ahead,
I
Lucy.
think we covered it.
Great.
I just wanted to clarify, like,
Nitpick away.
for
Lucy, you're breaking up. Can you try saying that again?
already. There is just going to have to be thought about, and you know, the fight doesn't always have to be violent in the real world.
No.
Result in bodily harm.
No, it doesn't. You know, in some of the arenas that we fight in are not physical. They're online, or they're oratory, you know, or they're written, you know. So yeah, that's a good reframing. Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah, just because the violence thing is like the outside possibility. You know, but I'm not saying there's never not a reason. There will never be a reason for that, but probably the very most rare thing.
Hopefully. Yeah. Notice that wrath comes last, right? This is not our first place that we go. We go through service and justice first, you know, and we try to solve through that. But we got to have this in our toolkit, you know, because again, you can't go straight to peace if we skip justice, and wrath is a mechanism for justice.
I also wanted to add that practice and training factor into a lot of this, like being able to recognize when we can be a benefit, being able to recognize when something is unjust, and being able to recognize when we have to take further action. All benefit from practice and training well before those moments happen.
Indeed. So as I like to say, I'm quoting an ancient philosopher whose name I forget at the time, but we fall to the level of our training. You know, we don't rise to our expectations. So if we've never trained, if we've never practiced in being compassionate in these ways, and I'm not saying you have to do it practically. In martial arts, we practice in the dojo or the training hall in a safe environment before we use it in our real lives. And training should take the same way. You practice, you can practice by doing, but also practice through training, through hypotheticals, through role-playing scenarios. So many places use role-playing for training. I don't necessarily mean fantasy role-playing, but using role-playing as a tool to go through specific situations where you have to accomplish a goal, and that is a way to prepare. So that's, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, Anna, because I almost let it go without saying, because I see the Jedi path as a path of constant training. So if we're a Jedi, we're training, and it doesn't need to be said, but maybe it does. So I thank you for that.
I got something to add to Anna.
Go ahead.
Well, I roleplay a lot with like my friends, and so like they are all Star Wars nerds, and I actually never thought that I could learn so much through role playing. So yeah, that's kind of good to do, I think, when you like. I always try to bring the philosophy in there, and they're like, "Whoa, mate, wow, why are you so wise?" And I'm like, yeah, and I like always try that. And I have a friend. I don't know what religion he has or something, but he's very wise in the role play, and like I have a few quotes from him that I think of every day. So yeah, that's something good, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my tools to explore Jedi philosophy is role play as a make-believe Jedi in a make-believe Star Wars environment. You know, which is fantasy, but but I use it as a workshop to work out in a safe environment some of my philosophy and ideas and putting it into action in a place where there's no real stakes, but there's make-believe stakes. So yeah, role playing is a great tool for training. Okay, last chance for any more thoughts on the Shapes of Compassion, because then I'm going to do my plugs and we're going to end the class. All right. So, further resources are, we have the website, Jedi Path Academy at jedipath.org. We have the YouTube channel, which if you're watching this now, you're on. If you're looking at the materials later in the Learners program, then the link will be to the YouTube. I have my book, my Jedi 101 book, Your First Step into a Larger World, available at this URL. And we have a Facebook page where most of the going-ons at Jedi Path Academy are announced, or when there's new essays or anything like that. Pardon me. The Facebook page is kind of like the central distribution of our work, excuse me. And we're on Twitter, though we're not very active. We don't have very many followers, but it's there. So, I just wanted to thank everyone for the participation in this class. And as always, may the Force guide you and protect you.